Hey Book Dragons, welcome back to my channel. Today I have a book review for you. Let's go. So the book I'm going to talk about today was recommended to me by a Barnes & Noble employee. Now this same employee had recommended another book to me way back in the day, Meddling Kids by Edgar Quintero, which I absolutely loved. It's one of my favorite books, and I thought, well, hey, if she recommended that book to me and I loved it, why not take her up on this other recommendation? And so I did. So the book I'm going to tell you about today is Reincarnation Blues by Michael Poore. This was a very interesting and difficult to describe book. It's not fantasy per se. I would call it more contemporary fiction with a fantastical skirting. There are elements of it that are fantastical, but it's more contemporary. It's more meant to be just a fun little story about a guy named Milo who has lived 999,000 he's lived 9,995 lives, and he has 5 lives left to get it right and attain perfection and pass on into the blissful ether of whatever lies after getting out of the reincarnation cycle. And along the way in his 9,995 lives, he has encountered this woman, or this, she's called a universal. She is death. But he's essentially fallen in love with death, and she's fallen for him as well. I mean, they're pretty hot and heavy together, and literally, and that's all I'm gonna say about that. It's very interesting because he is mortal, of course, and she is a universal. She's infinite. She has her duties as the way shower into the afterlife. And so you've got this really weird little story about a guy who's going along in each life. He's trying really hard to do the things that will eventually earn him perfection, and yet at the same time he's not so sure he wants to attain perfection, because then he might have to leave Susie. He might have to leave death and not be in a relationship with her anymore. And so it's just, I don't know, guys. This was a very meandering tale. I enjoyed some of the stories in the book, and that's kind of essentially what it boils down to. It is a book of short stories, essentially, because you're getting a window into all the different lives that Milo has led. And not all of them. I mean, otherwise the book would be ginormous. But you get little snippets from different lives that he has led that supposedly teach him certain things. And it's that some of them are fun, some of them are kind of they're okay. Some of them were just like, well, what did I just read, And they're not really cohesive. They're not really, they don't really flow together well, but, you're just kind of getting a glimpse. It's kind of like watching home movies. You put on the slide reel, you're watching this aspect of Milo's life, and that reel runs out, and so we're moving on to the next home movie, and just on and on you go, and you're seeing these different lives that Milo has lived. And at the end of each life, he gets to interact with Susie again. So he gets stuck back in the back in the in-between, I guess you would call it, between life and his next life, because he has to have that transition period to figure out if he's ready to go into his next life or not. And so he gets to spend time with Susie, and they do their thing. Yeah, they do their thing. And it's just really interesting, and yet not at the same time. Does that make any sense? It just doesn't flow well. But there were a lot of good stories in the book, interesting, and some of them border on ideas, like philosophical ideas about life and about meaning and about what we do to attain the afterlife, so to speak. And so some of the ideas that were presented to you on a plate were interesting, but it just wasn't really cooked well, if that makes sense. So I'm going to talk about some of the cons first. And I got that idea from a friend of mine, by the way, Ariel, over at Reading and Whatnot. If you have not watched her channel, you need to. She is amazing. And she, with her book reviews, she always tries to do the cons first and then end with the pros. And I think I'm going to do that with this video as well. We're going to try it on for size, okay? So, as far as cons go, there were times in the book that it would throw different terms at you. Like, oh, so-and-so meditated, or you should meditate more, or things like that, things that the author expects the reader to know and understand, or to at least have heard of. And yet the characters in the book don't really spend time engaging with these ideas and the meaning behind the ideas. There's one chapter in particular that deals a lot with Stoicism, like different Stoic beliefs, like memento mori, which literally translated, remember you are dying. Remember you only have this, you don't have that long to live, and then you're going to die, and you want to live your life to the fullest. So that sort of philosophy is dealt with in one of the chapters. It's not called that, but you can kind of tell, if you know Stoic philosophy, where it's leading. And that's all well and good. Some of the people reading the book probably understand that. I know I did. But the characters never really totally interacted with that idea. They talked about it. They just brought it up. It's like, oh yeah, though this is common knowledge. But maybe it isn't. And maybe you don't really understand, Mr. Character, what it's talking about. So I felt like the book was written more for the reader than it was for the characters. Which is fine. I mean, you want to write for your readers, right? But you want to write in such a way, at least in my personal opinion, that the characters are learning in a way that the reader is going to be able to go along with them on. You're going on that journey with the character instead of thinking about these ideas on your own. And so this book very much felt like it was written only with the reader in mind, and not so much with the characters having an experience of journey. And it was that way with meditation as well. Meditation is a pretty well-known term. It means different things to different people, but most people are familiar with the term. And yet the characters did not really seem to interact with it that much. One of the chapters in the book deals with Milo being a follower of the Buddha, and a lot of talk is made about meditation, but there's not really much engaging with that term. And so I guess what I'm saying with this, my son put it best. I was having a discussion with my son, and he really put it best. There's no real significance for the characters in bringing up these topics. It's with the reader in mind, and there's no significance for the characters. So that was the way I felt at various different times in this story. And I don't know. Not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but it just made the experience of reading the book a little bit less, because this book seemed to be very much about the journey that Milo goes on from life to life to life to eventually hopefully attain perfection. And yet there's nothing that glues different parts of the journey together necessarily. Now there are some things at the end that harken back to earlier stories in the book that make you think, oh, okay, well, maybe he's learned a little bit from this, and that's great. But overall, the journey was very disjointed. So now let's talk about the prose. There are several chapters in the book that I really enjoyed, one of which was where Milo was a follower of Siddhartha, the Buddha, and just to see his journey with the Buddha, and the Buddha is getting up in years at this point, and there's a little bit of dementia setting in, and it's really interesting to see the development of the Buddha's character in this particular story. Not necessarily Milo's, although he definitely had a part to play in it. But I think the Buddha chapter was one of my favorite stories in the book. The other chapter that I think I would probably say is one of my favorites is one that I mentioned just a few minutes ago, where it deals a lot with more Stoic philosophy and experiencing the reality that you're eventually going to die, so you might as well make the most of everything you do. And Milo's character kind of brings up these ideas to a group of people. And I really enjoyed the fact that these ideas were put out there in the story that they were put in, because I do think that they fit really well into those stories. I was just kind of, not happy with the overall engaging with the ideas. And I don't feel like they got it totally accurate, but that's neither here nor there. The idea that I really enjoyed in the Buddha chapter was dealing with non-attachment, and not being attached to everything in life, because eventually it's all going to go away, and all we have is what we have with us, our body. That's it, and eventually we're going to pass on to something else. So I really liked the fact that those ideas were presented. I just wish they would have had a little bit more follow through is all. And one other idea that I really liked, that seemed to be a very strong element throughout the entire book, is the fact that being human means not getting it right. And that's okay. So all this time throughout the story, Milo's working his way towards perfection. He's only got 5 lives left to get it right. And he starts to wonder if he doesn't really want to get it right. And he's kind of learning that being human means you're not really going to get it right totally. And that's okay. And I really liked that. That was a really well presented idea throughout the whole book, I thought. So it did have its good points. But overall, I kind of felt like the majority of the story was kind of a hot mess. I didn't love it. It's not a book that I would read again. I am probably going to unhaul this book. But I am glad I read it once and had the experience of it. And if you want to read this book, I say go for it. You may have a completely different experience with it than I did. You may enjoy it much better than I did. You may hate it and not like it as well as I did. Who knows? But Reincarnation Blues is a book that I think if you want to try it, you really should. Because if it sounds up your alley, it might in fact be up your alley. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you read this book? Have you even heard of this book? I had never heard of the book before I got the recommendation to read it. So let me know in the comments what you think. Make sure you are reading more books, guys, and I will chat with you soon.